Said it beautifully, Alicia, when you said like our whole goal here, like one of like the ethos of this podcast is really to invite like deeper connection to yourself, to the people that you love, to the world around you. And so this is just, our own perspective through lived experience on this topic. And I think it's always good, like if maybe you're in the thick of it right now where you're just like exploring and experimenting with different ways of being with people, and that's totally fine. I think what's helpful in any area of life is to just invite some curiosity to what is this bringing me? How am I actually, when I get real honest and still with myself, how is this actually making me feel?
Welcome back to another episode of Sessions for the Soul.
Yes, welcome. We're going to be talking all things sex and intimacy today, going from like talking about hookup culture to nervous system, emotional safety, what intimacy really looks like, foreplay, all things related to sex and intimacy. So I'm super excited.
Yes, we're going to dive right in. And this is like a fun episode because I think, people don't maybe expect us to be like diving into this topic, but it's such an important conversation when it comes to relationships and when it comes to also just like our culture and women and men, but like women in general, and our relationship with sex, with our bodies, with our partners, all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Do we just want to dive right into like the most potentially controversial one of hookup culture and why we kind of believe it's, a bit of a scam?
I mean, you know what? Yes, I think we do. I think this is a great place for us to start because um the thing is it controversial. I think probably if this rubs you the wrong way, I'm really sorry, you guys, for anyone listening. But ultimately, I think what we want to kind of like talk about is how, especially when we're younger, our relationships with our bodies, our relationships with just what sex is can be such a like performative act. It can be that thing that like we're doing because it's like it's what we're supposed to do. It's men like it, and women like it too, but kind of this thing of like, um, it's not really something we're like consciously thinking about. We're not consciously thinking about like what we're giving someone and what we're doing with our bodies, if that makes sense. And so we just kind of wanted to start by opening up the discussion around that. And also, I want to say, I would like to preface it with this. This is not coming from a place of judgment of like, if you are
Mm.
out there like hooking up with whoever, living your best life, like throwing
Go
that
for
thing
it.
around, go for it. Girl, I've been there. Babe, I've been there. I also needed a lot of therapy. Okay. After the fact. So, I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes you learn through experience.
Yes.
Um, but exactly. I think that, just prefacing it with that, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah. None of this is coming from, and I hope this goes without saying for everything that we talk about, it's not coming from a place of like desiring to shame or blame or place judgment or anything like that. It's a matter of our, shared life experience and just wanting to share, some of our personal perspectives and insights that we've gained along the way. And, you mentioned, Alicia, just being like in our younger years, and some who are listening are like, you're still in your younger years, stop. But there is a big push and a big messaging, I think, especially over the last maybe like 5 to 7 years, a big push for casual sex, and it's no big deal. It can be this transactional thing of we're not actually bonded, kind of the no strings attached, friends with bennies approach, where it's like that's actually not how it works, because physiologically speaking, when you engage sexually with someone, when you're having sex with someone, there's a chemical cascade that's happening of oxytocin and all of the feel good and love and bonding hormones that are being secreted in your body and in their body, whoever you're with. And so there is this natural chemical reaction of creating a bond. And it's really hard to basically what hookup culture is doing is saying ignore that, dissociate from that mind and body, like the mind and body dissociation and separation from the natural bonding that's happening in any sort of sexual engagement and interaction, and allow it to just be transactional. And it's not that simple. Like it just cannot be that simple physiologically. So it's asking you to go against what is innately happening each time that you engage sexually with someone, which is challenging.
Oh, for sure, 100%. It's asking us, it's requiring that we ignore our biology and we ignore our chemistry, and also like, you touched on so many things that I'm like, yes, about. And one of them, like, that just really like struck a chord is kind of like that thing of like, we're literally exchanging DNA with someone. I mean, okay, yeah, ideally, maybe you're having safe sex. That's not the case most of the time. Let's be so fucking for real for a second. Um, and I'm not saying that like I don't know how this is coming across. I'm definitely gonna fixate on this for a month after this podcast comes out. But like, you're literally exchanging DNA, and to me, it's like, I think you and I have talked about this before, how it's like the closest to like one another's soul you can like literally get.
Mhm.
And that exchange, it's like sacred. It's a sacred thing. And I'm not talking sacred from like because of a book that says it is or whatever. I'm talking about when you really allow yourself to go on the experience of like, of having sex with someone you love, like that you're in love with, is so different and has a different quality than just hooking up that with
Mhm.
someone you just met or whatever. Like, yeah, it can, there's so many things that can be fun, or like it can feel fun in the moment, but you also touched on the dopamine, like the oxytocin, and so it's kind of like actually using drugs. Like, it's actually like a hit of something that's like, oh, that felt really good, and then there's a crash, just like using drugs. And so on the other end of that, like, what are the repercussions of just kind of letting our bodies be this thing that we use for transaction? And also, when you said this, like, is making me laugh, like the push for casual sex in the last 10 years. Um, I was listening to Miley Cyrus on her mom and her sister have a podcast called Sorry or Cyrus. And Miley was on yesterday. I love her, always have, always will. And she's like a wise soul, and she's been through so many versions of herself. And it was so funny because they brought up like how mad people were about like some of her breaking out of Disney and like whatever, all these things. And she was like, if we had a if we could see into the future, we would have seen how Can't Be Tamed was quite literally PG. Like, the
Mhm.
radio today is like, I can't even tell you some of the songs my nephews, my niece are like, oh, I
Mhm.
love this song. And then I listen to it. I'm like, where did you hear that? They're like, yeah, it was on the radio. What?
Yeah.
No. I think that was on the radio. Okay, cool. So what
Yeah.
it's not good. And I think like we become desensitized as a culture
Yeah.
when you open your phone and you see butt cheeks everywhere. No
Mhm.
disrespect. Like, my butt cheeks are on the internet, you guys. They literally are. Okay. Like, this is not this is truly like speaking from a place of like just the experience lived and the perspective gained from like walking a
Mhm.
certain path. And there are so many perspectives and kind of uh different ways that it manifests and it works, but in each of our lives, like the way that it unfolds. But for me, I think the reason this conversation is important, and I wanted to like bring this, Kayla and I wanted to have this, is because if we could, it's like how when we were kids, adults said to us, learn from my mistakes, or
Mhm.
like learn from this thing that like I understand now. And if
Mhm.
there's anything we can help people understand is like how much capacity and how amazing these things can be when we're like willing to like go deep and be vulnerable and like,
Mhm.
you know, if that makes any sense.
It does. And I think too, like sometimes there are some things in life where it's so easy to be like, oh, learn from my mistakes, And as a kid or teenager or young adult, you're like, okay, mom, shut up, like I'm going to do it my way. And then you do it your way and you're like, oh, okay, mom was right or so and so was right. And so some things like we're just meant to kind of walk through in some way, and not necessarily just with sex and intimacy, but with any lesson learned, where the lesson is best learned when you walk through it. But I think just to touch on some of the points that you made about the casual and transactional orientation towards sex, there's a lot of validation seeking that can come from that process, where that can be a bit of a motivating factor of being in quote unquote hookup culture or having these kind of transactional interactions with people. There's a lot of validation seeking that can happen from that. And that could be through the act of sex and, okay, I'm actually desirable. Somebody wants me, somebody wants to be with me. It can be from feeling like you're having some level of power over the other person, of like, that if you reach out to this person, they're going to be immediately available to meet up with you. So like there's that component. And then there's also the component that you touched on as well, of like the dopamine hit and the oxytocin connection and those things, where it's an opportunity for you to literally feel alive in your body. And for some people, the reason for that is because you feel so dead in your own body and in your own life. And so it's this almost like awakening that's happening, this physical and temporary sensation that feels good or that feels like anything, right? Because sometimes the sensation of anything, if you think of things like self harm, drug use, things like that, like you're getting some sort of a sensation. And sometimes that's better than absolutely nothing, like the apathy that you're feeling in your mind and body. So, those are a couple components that were coming to mind for me as well. And I think also you mentioned about how there's such a different quality that sex and intimacy hold in a committed, a long-term relationship, a relationship where both people are in it and like fully in it. That's so different. It feels so different than the quick fix essentially, or the cheap thrills that a more transactional approach takes. And I think that again is one of the lies. And I think, to tie in maybe even like divorce culture in some ways, which again is going to rub people the wrong way, but there's this overall social messaging that there's always something new, there's something better out there. And it can be really easy to fall into that pattern of, this feels like it's getting boring, or this feels like it's taking work. And I know that I can just go, get on an app or find somebody through XYZ means and get something, quick and easy. So there's a lot of social messaging, a lot of cultural messaging out there, that just makes it really challenging. And also, like you mentioned, the exposure to things like pornography or subtle pornography that's available on just like regular social media. So it's rough out there for people right now to try and navigate this, and to be like, okay, I'm going to choose something different for myself. I'm going to choose different than what the culture is out there preaching that I should do.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you said all of that, because when you were talking about the seeking, like that speaks to so much my own experience with it. When I was in college, I had such low self-worth. I mean, like, listen, it's a journey, folks. It comes and goes. But I have the tools now to like nurture that. And at the time, going from being a young woman, and I started to get like sexual male attention when I was about 10 years old. And my brain was like, this is so positive. Like, I'm just like, they want me. I was 10. Are you kidding me? Look at my niece who's 11. And I'm
Yeah.
like, if a 16-year-old man was hitting on her, I would first of all punch him in the
Yeah.
throat and be like,
Yeah.
what the fuck is wrong with you?
Yeah.
And then also like I think it speaks to too, like when our bodies change before a time that's like appropriate. Hilarious. The first time I was ever like really hit on, I was like literally 10, 11. And I don't know if you were there in the moment. I think you were. I really think you were. It was at Bible camp, babe. And a counselor put his arm around me, did a little pickup line, put his arm around me. And our counselor literally said to him, "She's a camper. You're disgusting. She's 10." And
Yeah. So,
that that was like a core moment in
mhm.
my, because I was like, whoa, like he was like, then why does she look 15? And I was like, I look 15? Fuck yeah. Like,
Yeah, it feels good when you're young to have I've thought about just previous just like in high school, middle school, that age where it's like, ooh, it feels good to have that recognition and that validation from someone older than you, which is, I mean, holy smokes, terrifying because predator behavior, but it feels good, you know what I mean, at the time. And then you look back and you're like, yikes, that's not good.
no, absolutely, absolutely. And so I think like just understanding, like, for our listeners, just understanding kind of like the reason we are touching on this and like the lens we're coming from, because ultimately like our goal is to help people live more connected
Yeah.
lives that feel good, because at the end of all of that, like at the end of the seeking or the awaking, waking ourselves up, or like whatever it is, it's kind of like what's on the other side, like what's the what is the actual payoff for a moment's like
Yeah.
satisfaction, and understanding what that actually feels like. And so, we could probably have a whole episode about scams of the modern world, but I think the way that we encourage young women, to um like to exactly like you said at the beginning of this, to kind of participate in these things, and there's no like, oh, there's no repercussion, there's no like other side, like you're liberated through this. And I'm not saying that you can't be liberated through these things. For some people it is liberating based on sexual abuse or things like that, to like take control of their own
Yeah.
experience. And so totally understanding that and validating that, and
Yeah.
also, shining a light on like how it's nuanced, and there's so many different ways it manifests. And so it's kind of funny because I didn't I became more I my perspective shifted on all of this like the older I got. um Especially, I lived in Los Angeles for 4 years, like, girl, that's a wild place.
Yeah.
And that, it was great and fun, and like in the sense that I love LA and it holds such a special place in my heart. But a big reason why I left was the superficial or the surface level living. Like, I craved depth, I craved connection and love and
Yeah.
something meaningful. And my soul was so hungry for more.
Yeah.
And I was not finding it there. And yeah.
It can start to feel so lonely and empty. And I think, I mean, you said it beautifully, Alicia, when you said like our whole goal here, like one of like the ethos of this podcast is really to invite like deeper connection to yourself, to the people that you love, to the world around you. And so this is just, our own perspective through lived experience on this topic. And I think it's always good, like if maybe you're in the thick of it right now where you're just like exploring and experimenting with different ways of being with people, and that's totally fine. I think what's helpful in any area of life is to just invite some curiosity to what is this bringing me. How am I actually, when I get real honest and still with myself, how is this actually making me feel more connected, less connected, etc. And so just inviting some curiosity to your patterns when it comes to sex and intimacy and connection. Um, One of the things we want to talk about, I don't know if we want to switch to foreplay real quick, just for opportunities for connection throughout
Yes,
the day.
absolutely. Absolutely. I think this is going to be such a fun topic, because I think when we think about foreplay, we think like, we think of sexual acts,
Mm-hmm.
but it's so much more than that. Like, foreplay is the contact made throughout the day. It's the kisses that like you exchange with your partner throughout the day. It's the hand holding. It's so many things. Like it encompasses like our connection that we are participating in throughout the day, not just what's going on right before we participate in acts, if that makes sense.
For sure. Yeah, I think it's easy to confuse foreplay with like the physical priming for sex, like the physical like let's get aroused for sex, right? And whatever that involves for you. So it's so much deeper than that and so much more nuanced than that. And it starts the moment that you wake up and how you approach each other from that moment on. And so, like you said, Alicia, like the physical affection, whether it be kisses or cuddling or hand holding, or like when you walk by and, pat them on the booty or, rub their shoulder, whatever it is, like those exchanges of physical contact can be a really great way of tapping into foreplay or kind of priming. And also, by the way, that doesn't mean if you are starting your day out like this and being really intentional, that doesn't mean that the expectation has to be sex at night, right? Or at some point during the day. It's this ongoing process when you start to look at your life through the lens of all of these acts are for deeper intimacy, deeper connection, and can be considered under the umbrella of foreplay. And so I'm not doing it because I'm trying to expect or get sex out of it. I'm doing it because I want deeper connection, and the natural, thing on the other side of that can be sex. Whatever the frequency looks like for you. So it can even be the little things of like helping out around the house without being asked. Expressing gratitude for one another, laughing together, being playful and childlike, and just having fun together. I wrote down on my list too. I was like, have you gone to the gym together? Because that's nice foreplay to like, watch each other work out. But just it's those little things, right? The things that you don't necessarily think about as being foreplay, but the things that allow you to like feel deeper connection to one another, and that also, make you feel connected and attracted to, and like you desire to actually be close to your partner.
Absolutely. I think the essence of it, right, is just maintaining your relationship, maintaining connection throughout the relationship. Like throughout the day, throughout your encounters together. And not, you know, I think sometimes we don't realize like how important those small moments are, or like that quality time is, and how that actually creates like the foundation for greater intimacy and greater, you know um just greater connection, and also like safety to go and explore together, to go and like really like, not to be like crazy, you guys, to give yourself to each other, to like go deep. And sometimes I think culturally, like, there's like, oh, well, that's like a girl thing. I've heard that like, well, for men it's different. Okay, like chemically, maybe, yes, there are some differences that we experience and how sex is experienced in our bodies and what happens in our brains and things like that. But I also think like a man's capacity for intimacy and to like be vulnerable and to go deep in that way is 100% there. Like, y'all, I don't want your excuses. You know what I'm saying? Like, go, like, if you're a man listening to this, I challenge you to see like how can you bring presence to your relationship, so that that intimacy and that foreplay and that connection is like being nurtured all the time, not just like in a moment of like, oh, I'm in the mood or whatever, right? And
Yeah.
I love what you said too, Kayla, about like the gym. Oh my gosh, that's so funny because we all have our little things, you know what I mean? Um,
Yes, and it's the things to like get curious about it, like get curious about what feels like it's deepening connection in your relationship or like getting you excited maybe about you know, having sex or being intimate in some way at some point during the day or night or whatever. So it's the little things, and you mentioned how like we don't give enough credit to men, especially where it's like they are fully capable of understanding this concept of creating deeper connection. And some of that comes from social messaging. I made a post on TikTok a few weeks ago that ended up going viral, and it was about why she's not initiating intimacy with you. And it was just like a list of reasons that we're actually going to cover, like some of these things like nervous system, emotional safety, things like that. So many women related, and then so many men were also commenting. Some were like, oh, that's so beautiful and thoughtful, and some were like, oh my gosh, like this is a belief system that this person has. And so, you know, there's of course a lot of variance when it comes to like where the social messaging is coming from for each person, how they're approaching sex, what their belief system is around like a man and a woman's role in sex and intimacy, what's expected, blah blah blah. So there are those things, but I think if you're listening to this podcast and you're like, oh, this is like a really nice perspective of like how foreplay is so important throughout the day, and it's not just the act right before sex, but it's this buildup of things over time. I think sometimes it can be helpful if you have a partner who maybe isn't on the same page to just sit down and have that loving conversation of like, hey, maybe let's like try and look at it through this lens and just kind of see how that goes for both of us. Because I think sometimes if there's a lack, like you don't know what you don't know. So if you don't know that foreplay is something that starts, you know, from the moment that you wake up, it's going to be tough for someone to bring that mindful awareness to how they're, you know, engaging with you throughout the day. So having those conversations can be super helpful instead of if you're listening and you're like, oh yeah, this is good, and then you just expect your partner to know this information, it's not going to go well.
Yeah, and also like on that, like if you're listening to this and you're like, "Gosh, I'm desiring this. I realize this is like something that's missing maybe or that isn't quite being like fulfilled in my relationship." Just remembering too like not to be like, well, he's not doing that, so he doesn't, you know, like don't let this be ammunition for like means for disconnect or like
Yes.
a fight or whatever. Like, I don't know if fight's the right word, but just remembering that like this is to create a greater conversation that actually in turn creates greater connection and deepens connection, and maybe going through and like recognizing what are the ways you and your partner, if you're listening to this and you are partnered, what are the ways that you do participate in this in ways, you know, what are those like little moments like for you? And if you're single and you're listening to this, this can be a great way for you to kind of like understand what your needs are and like what you actually truly desire in a life partner or in someone you're wanting to be in relationship with. Um, to have greater intimacy, greater connection, to be able to explore together. And, you know, maybe like I know we've given a few examples of what this like can look like, but also maybe it's unique to you and your partner, and there's like that thing that we didn't list or we haven't said because for us it's we don't know about it, or that's not how it shows up in our relationship, and that is 100% welcome, and to explore that in yourselves. Like, you know, like for Kayla it's the gym. Just kidding. And for me it's I genuinely love playing like with my partner's hair. Like I just love like
Mhm.
a moment where we just like slow down and either connect physically or he's laying on the couch and I just play with his hair. It's not sexual literally at all. It's
Mhm.
the connection of like of doing something that brings one another joy, that like nourishes a part of us, that brings us in contact and into touch. So explore what that might be like in your own partnership.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think it's so important as well, and you kind of touched on this too, of like you have to get familiar with yourself and with what feels good for you and what you enjoy and what allows you to feel connected. Because if you're not clear on that, your partner certainly isn't clear on it. So you have to really, be in tune with what's feeling good, what doesn't feel good. And I'm not just talking physically, I'm talking about all the other things that happen throughout the day. What makes you feel connected and supported and loved and cared for. And, to be able to sit down and have those conversations of like, hey, I really like, when we sit down or cuddle on the couch and I get to play with your hair, like it feels really good for me to do that. Like I just feel so connected to you. And having those conversations and just being vulnerable with one another, it makes all the difference, because if there's a lack of that insight, if it starts with the lack of personal insight and then the lack of communication of that insight to the other person, it's not a good recipe for connection and deep intimacy and foreplay and all those things. So you have to have that insight, you have to get curious about yourself, and then you have to be willing to be vulnerable to communicate those things to the other person.
Absolutely. I love that. I think this is a good place for us to start to explore why we are disconnected sometimes in our intimate relationships, or what causes that disconnect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the nervous system is such a huge piece to this. And if you're listening and if you're someone who's like, gosh, I don't even feel connected to my partner. I don't even feel like a desire to engage in anything that would even be considered foreplay or to be physically affectionate and connected with my partner. A lot of times that's coming from a place of nervous system dysregulation where you're hyper aroused. So that could be like, high levels of stress, anxiety, unresolved trauma. So this could be from past, negative or traumatic experiences when it comes to sex or intimacy or connection. So all of those dysregulating factors are, again, in your brain and in your body and your nervous system, are turning up the volume on those, like that emotional activation where in your brain the amygdala essentially is hyperactive, and so it's sensing for any potential threats. It's trying to figure out if there's an issue with safety, and it's trying to keep you safe instead of seeking out and trying to sense for pleasure and connection and safety. So it's scanning for all the things that could potentially go wrong. It's sounding off the alarms, and then your prefrontal cortex, where you're like decision making, all of that stuff, can sometimes also turn online in a way that's like trying to, again, assess for, is this person safe? Am I safe enough to actually like relax into this? And some of those fear-based or shame-based thoughts can start coming to the surface. So again, physiologically speaking, your body is not in a place and your mind is not in a place to actually like relax into any sort of connection, vulnerability, intimacy, sex, anything like that. And so it's a really tough place to be trying to connect with your partner when you in your own body are feeling so dysregulated.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you just brought that up and put a light on it, because I think so many people are unaware of like how throughout the day or their job or whatever it is that they're like, that has their nervous system and their whole stress response like in overdrive. And then like coming home at the end of the night, or when you finally come back together, you know, having maybe a partner who like is desiring that connection or tries to initiate or something like that, and you like being like, whoa, I don't
Yeah.
want, like, I can't do this. And I also want to touch on with that like the element of, and Kayla, you mentioned this a bit, like the our thoughts, like our frontal cortex, and depending on attachment styles, depending on all of these different things, because of the subtle cues we're picking up on in our partners and things like that throughout the day, right? We are often, if we're more anxious in our attachment, or if we're having an overactive frontal cortex, we might be internalizing or interpreting our partner's behavior as rejection, as, oh, they don't even, want me, or he's mad or she's mad, or um, there we might be like telling a story essentially about maybe what's going on. And sometimes that can also drive this wedge in intimacy, as opposed to, some resolutions for that are having conversations, also getting in your body. And I'm sure like we'll dive into this of how to really regulate the nervous system. And we've talked about it in other episodes, right? Like it's right back to that thing of like breathing into your body, physically doing things to alleviate tension, trying to just bring that stress response down. And also something that was coming to mind when you were saying that too is like the hormonal element of when we're so stressed out, like cortisol is running through our body. We maybe aren't eating the best. We're not feeding our body in ways that promotes like healthy hormonal balances. Like it's really hard to want to sexually connect or have that vulnerability, because sometimes, I mean, all the time, like sex is vulnerable, right? Like it
Yeah.
requires a vulnerability, it requires a softening. So if your armor is up and you are like ready for a fight or ready for survival or scanning for that danger, um, that softening is going to be a lot more challenging, or it's going to feel like less authentic or less maybe pleasurable or good. It might feel like an exchange or like something that's forced.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned like the physical, the body component to all of this as well. And when you are feeling like you're in that survival mode state, or you're super stressed out, or you're completely shut down and like disconnected from your body, from your life, from the people around you, your body physically, and we've talked about this in other episodes, but you are holding so much tension in your body, and your breathing is shallow, you're clenching in ways that you generally wouldn't, your blood flow is being directed to parts of your body that are intended for survival. Sex is not survival. And so that element, like the again, the physiological element of that is when you're in survival mode, your pelvic floor is incredibly tense. So that's not really enjoyable because you need to soften and relax into it. Blood flow isn't going to where it needs to go, and your breathing isn't like, deep and expansive. So there's all these components that are at play here, hormonally speaking, and within your physical body as well, the way that you're carrying your body. And so it can be so helpful to have these practices, like you mentioned, Alicia, of like sometimes it's even just taking a few minutes to like breathe and really create that space, and create that softening in your body, to start training your body like, okay, things are safe. I'm safe here. I'm in this present moment. I'm connected to my own body. I'm connected to my mind and my emotional experience right now. And because of that, I'm opening up and expanding the capacity to connect with my partner. And if you're listening to this and you're like, oh my gosh, I have such a hard time with this, it's a matter of trying to explore and get curious about what helps you feel more grounded, what helps you feel more calm and centered and present in the moment. And maybe, I think you mentioned, Alicia, like if you come home from like a stressful day at work or something, maybe it's finding, something that just helps you kind of like make that transition of, work was really stressful. I'm having a really hard time with that, but I'm going to sit in my car for like 10 minutes and scroll Instagram and just like give my mind a break, give my body a break, use that time to actually reset intentionally, and then come into the home and know that I'm approaching it with presence. I've had a moment to decompress, and I'm going to connect with myself and my partner or my family or whatever. So it's finding ways to intentionally down regulate the nervous system so that your body feels safe, and so that you can actually have the capacity to connect with your partner.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. It's all with intention. And I think that brings us kind of to exploring ways to build intimacy. Like how can we build intimacy? And we've kind of already touched on this in ways, and how it really is the little moments, and it is those little moments that add up to connection, to physical connection, but also to emotional connection and emotional safety, and what that looks like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, emotional safety, again, kind of like when we were talking about foreplay and building intimacy, is so nuanced in some ways, where it's not super straightforward. It's in the little moments that are adding up throughout the day that are seemingly so insignificant, but they matter. And, it can be in having those deep conversations, those hard conversations, which we just did an episode, I think a couple episodes ago, on how to have those hard conversations, where you're approaching those conversations, you're creating space for those conversations with people that you love in a way that isn't blaming and shaming and full of judgment, but just being open to actually seeing and witnessing your partner being vulnerable, being open to receiving that and engaging in an actual conversation, a dialogue with this person, so that you can actually, work through those hard things or have those really raw and vulnerable moments. So it's things like that that actually matter. Those hard conversations, those deep conversations matter when it comes to, you know, building that emotional safety.
Absolutely. I love that, and wouldn't have like couldn't have said it better myself. It's exactly that. And you know, I think sometimes we don't realize like when we dismiss someone or something because we're not like, there's also the little moments throughout the day where maybe it's not like an intentional hard, like, let's sit down and have this hard conversation, but the little moments, the little conversations where maybe we're dismissive, or maybe our partner's dismissive to us, or they don't literally say anything back, or whatever it is, right? Like, that is a place where emotional safety is created, because even if it's
Yep.
like seemingly about, I don't even know, the dishes, groceries, like a funny story or a joke, a meme, right? Like it can be about something so simple, but when we don't acknowledge, like literally the most basic thing, acknowledge that someone said something to us, or at least say like, I hear you, that's funny, I can't really think about that right now. That's acknowledgement. It might not feel great, but at least it's something to where there's connection, that is like, there's acknowledgement, there's a contact being made to something. But when we're, in some of those like seemingly less serious conversations or moments, those matter as well, and those do add up. And so it's really about like, I think what we're getting at here, Kayla and I are really like touching on, is it's the little things. um and it's the things that really feed the relationship outside of just these like bigger acts. It's the
Mm-hmm.
safety we create in one another. And it is this intimacy, I think, can be confused with like this grandiose act. And we've talked about this before. And Kayla and I talk about this all the time, even in like self care or whatever, how we think it's like these grand acts of like connection, or this grand act of intention, this monumental effort. And it's actually like, it's not. It's the simple, it's the moment to moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, even the things of like being consistent, like showing up and being consistent in your partner's life, whatever that looks like. It could be, financially consistent, providing stability for, your household, or whatever that looks like for you. Consistent in the way that you're showing up with the hard conversations or the little conversations that matter throughout the day. So being consistent in the way that you're engaging, because if there's a lack of consistency, that means that there's a presence and an essence of unpredictability, and unpredictability is not good, right? So we've talked about this in previous episodes as well, of when there's a lack of consistency, our brains really thrive off of predictability and being able to kind of know the general pattern in which something's going to play out. And when you have a partner, or maybe you're the partner who's listening, when you're in a space of inconsistency and unpredictability, it's creating a massive lack of safety. And we've also talked about, the importance of taking ownership and really having a sense of agency and responsibility in your relationship. And it's those things too. It's the way that you approach the relationship, from a place of ownership rather than from a place of blame and like, well, this is just the way I am, or, this is all your fault, and trying to like keep score and place blame and all of those things. Those are amazing ways at creating disconnection, at pushing your partner away, and creating, driving just a massive wedge between you and your partner when you're coming from a place of unpredictability and, just trying to place blame and keep score. 10 out
Absolutely.
of 10 recommend.
10 out of 10, don't recommend that. You know what else I don't recommend is hot and cold behavior. Like when you were talking about that, I was thinking about too, like how sometimes it's like ups and downs and emotional highs and lows, and how that creates emotional, it creates, what's the word? Instability. Is that a word?
Instability. Yes.
Instability. Thank you. Emotional instability. You guys, my brain doesn't always work. It's fine. Also, I am illiterate. Um, I can read, but I'm highly dyslexic. So can I? Um, but anyway, so ask Kayla. My English papers, yeah, I copied her a lot. Um, okay. Um, in every class. But anyway, the emotional instability that's created from a space of not being consistent. And like, here's the thing, I want to clarify. Yeah, we all have bad days. We all have days where it's like, okay, but when we're consistently inconsistent, or we're consistently like, sort of love bombing and then pulling away, that's actually abusive. I'm so sorry if you're hearing this and you're like, that I do that. Well, I'm really sorry. That's abusive.
And
Um,
stop doing it.
go to therapy.
Yes.
Stop. Okay. Because one, it's speaking to a part of yourself that's like not that where there's damage, where there's been damage done that isn't that it's not from nothing. And then also, it's causing damage to the people that you love. And so I don't think that that's a reflection of what anybody wants to do to their people, their partners, their whatever. Their family, and how that is such a part of this whole thing that we've just talked about, right? Just to kind of add to what Kayla had just previously said, it is it's all of these things encompassing, and I think emotional safety is one of the most important parts of sex, like
Yeah.
across the
I, I
board.
don't I don't think you can have true intimacy, like meaningful, connected sex if there's a lack of emotional safety. Like that just feels like the absolute foundation or bedrock of intimacy. I had a counselor in my life at one point who said, intimacy is into me, you see, and into you, I see. Like that's the whole process of intimacy, of the actual seeing and witnessing of one another at a really deep, like soul level. It's not shallow, it's not surface level, it's a very deep experience. And I think that's so beautiful. One of the things that I was thinking of too, just on the topic of emotional safety, is to not weaponize previous vulnerability. And what that means is if your partner has been vulnerable with you in some way, in the hard conversations and sharing something that feels sensitive and vulnerable and like it was risky to share, and they're trusting you with it, you don't want to take that thing and weaponize it at some point in the future and use it against them, or to shame them for it, or to make fun of them for it, embarrass that, like whatever that looks like, where you're weaponizing the vulnerable thing that they shared with you and that they actually trusted you to open up. Because again, what you're teaching your partner is that you're not safe. There's a lack of trust, there's a lack of intimacy, there's a lack of respect in the relationship for each other. And so it's really, I think it's incredibly damaging. And I think we may have touched on it a little bit in the how to have hard conversations episode, where it can be really easy as like a defense mechanism, like it's like a cheap way of trying to hurt your partner, is by taking something that they shared with you in a very vulnerable state and weaponizing it against them. So, don't do that.
Oh my God, I love it. Don't do that. No, yeah. I mean, exactly. Do not do that. Yeah, because you know what? That's not fair. And it it creates, I think we've all maybe been in situations or relationships or whatever where we didn't have emotional safety. And all it does is it drives the wedge farther into the separation. And also I mean, it's not a good look. It's like not a good look to be an asshole like that. And excuse my language, but I don't know how else to put it, you guys. I really don't know how to put it any other way. And I think one thing that Kayla and I just have in mind as we had this conversation, as we're having this conversation, is that we realize that like this is all so nuanced and it's so different for everybody. Like sex is so different for everyone. What is like taboo for one person is like that is like how we like fell in love, and or that's how we really like opened up as a couple and went deeper. As to another person, like having emotional conversations might make the walls go up more at first. And so just recognizing like meeting yourself where you're at, in the sense of really, like Kayla had mentioned previously, is like it is a huge part of this is self-reflecting and understanding your own desires, your own needs, what actually you're looking for, and what is like important to you, and what actually like what do you like, what do you want, because if you don't know, then all of this is going to be really hard to explore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think maybe we should have led with this. But if you've made it this far, you get this disclaimer of this is different for everyone, and that can be based on your upbringing. It can be based on religious or cultural contexts in which you were raised, the messaging that comes with all the different cultures and religions and spiritual beliefs and things like that can really kind of ingrain a certain narrative, good, bad, or indifferent, about sex and intimacy and how to be in a relationship and the roles that you play in a relationship. And we touched on very briefly, but traumatic experiences, of course, also shift the narrative on what sex is and intimacy and your worth and all of those things. And it could even just be that maybe in your upbringing you didn't have these conversations. You didn't have anyone who was like, "Hey, let's talk about sex. Like, let's have that conversation," and not just from the perspective of like, "Yeah, make sure you use a condom," or
Right.
"Let's take you to go get some, birth control," but like actually having someone in your life who was willing to have those, kind of uncomfy conversations for both the adult and the child. But to actually let you know, like, hey, here are some ways that you should, expect to be loved and to be seen and to be honored. And I think a lot of people don't have that conversation. And so we get our education from pornography, we get our education from music and from social media, especially, and in this day and age. And so it can be really confusing, I think, sometimes as an adult to be like, wait, how do I deconstruct these previous beliefs around something that is so sensitive and tender and personal? And I think sometimes it can be helpful. It feels like a taboo topic to bring up with someone, but I do think that there are some times, to be like, I'm questioning everything I know about sex, and I'm feeling like something's off, maybe in my own relationship or the way that I'm like perceiving things, and to have someone that you can go to and just be like, hey, can we have like a really uncomfortable conversation, but like it's an important conversation for me, because then you can kind of like gain new perspective, bounce things off of someone, and to kind of check the belief systems around your own stuff. Or if there's another person involved, to be like, oh yeah, that's, I think that's pretty normal. Or like, oh no, that's a huge red flag. So all like, it's so nuanced, it's so personal, it's so individual, and it's influenced by so many different things. But I think sometimes just being open to the concept of nuance, and also being open to having those kind of uncomfortable conversations, but sometimes it's for a really important reason.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, I love that you just said all of that. And anyone listening, I want to also touch on, just as Kayla was saying that, this came up for me of like how important it is to remember as well, that your worth has nothing to do with your sex life, has nothing to do with how often you and your partner engage in sex, has nothing to do with any of that. And I think it's really a trap we can fall into in our relationships of like, we haven't had sex for, this long, and there can be a million factors as to why. But that's again where another hard conversation comes in, because internalizing that and saying that like I'm not desirable or they don't want me or maybe the spark is dead or whatever. All of those things are um that doesn't actually have anything to do with your value, with what you bring to a relationship. And really being aware of that, I think, can be really important, especially for those of us who struggle with self-worth, who struggle with the type of validation we receive and what we make that mean about ourselves. And then also, yeah, just the cultural element of like, I don't know about y'all, but I was getting my ideas of what like romance and love look like from like all the wrong places as a young child. My parents did not at all care what we watched really. So at 3, I was like, okay, so my favorite movie was the Titanic. I literally was like, okay, if he doesn't want to die for me and we're not like hooking up in the back of a car, then honestly,
Yes.
like trash, absolute trash. And then from there, it like, as you were saying that, I literally wanted to be like, you mean to tell me that One Tree Hill was not a valid place to base my foundation of what relationships should look like on? God damn
Yeah.
it.
Yep.
Because I did that, you guys. No, for sure. Like I was such a movie, like Hollywood, like movies and film
Yes.
girl. And so I'm here to tell you like literally none of those are good representations of what things will. He's not gonna stand outside your window with a boombox. Maybe he will. That's crazy. Tell us if he has. That's
We want
amazing.
to hear your stories. Yeah, no, I think that's such a good point because and I wanted to mention that too of like there's so many expectations out there that are put out there on social media in silly magazines and like wherever you're trying to get your information about what sex should look like and how steamy it is and how it just like always happens so spontaneously and it's so sexy all the time and this is how often you should be having sex and if you're not something's wrong with you or your relationship is going to fail. So there's all this messaging out there
Yeah.
and it can be really hard if you're not having those conversations with people or starting to realize like, oh, that's just Hollywood. That's what that is. Like it sells well in movies. It's fun to watch, like the exciting romance and all of that, but that's like not reality.
No, you want to know what it is. It's not reality because you know what wouldn't sell well is the when two people are bloated and just like ate a bunch of food and laying in bed. It's like and there's like that moment of like, oh, like yeah, I do want to have sex with you, but like and then like when you awkwardly take off your underwear together because it's like, okay, we're going to do this. That's not
Yeah.
sexy. That's literally not
No.
sexy at all, but it's real life. Let me go grab a towel. That's not sexy.
There's this account that I follow that's doing like a series of like the reality of sex that you don't see in movies and it's all those things. It's like the noises that happen and like just the things that happen where you're like, "Oh my God, I cannot believe this." And it's the reality, right? And so it's like we don't see those things in the movies. And luckily there are some, good resources out there, good accounts or credible people who are like out there trying to preach reality, which is amazing. And also like just have conversations sometimes with people and you don't have to go into like all the details of your sex life, but to just like bring up some of the things where it's like, oh fuck, this happened and it was so awkward, you know?
Yeah.
And that's okay. Like I think there's a lot of danger that comes in like staying completely isolated and keeping it, under this like under the guise of like this has to be a big secret because then you're not getting other perspectives and you're only, perceiving your sex and intimacy through the lens of whatever your, education was, which was probably not great education.
Absolutely, absolutely. And as you were saying that, I was just thinking about how primal and like animalistic sex really is. And so, like, if you think about that, that is not, that's like, it's kind of like raw and real and like those sounds that we were just talking about. It's like, it is like animalistic. And when you think about it, it's like a little bit like it's almost not civilized in a way, in the sense that like, yeah, some like weird shit can happen. And
Yeah.
so just exactly like Kayla just said, like having the conversations, not being isolated, continuing to just like normalize, I think some of it as well. Like, oh my gosh, the things that we get embarrassed about early on in relationships and things that like when you're down the road, you're like, yeah,
Yeah.
like what? It just happened. Like, yeah, you don't
Yeah.
even think twice about those things eventually. And so, um, and being able to laugh, I think as a couple, being able to just kind of bring levity to some of those more like embarrassing or like less sexy moments is important too, because otherwise then maybe it makes you feel a little bit more awkward. But when you both can just be like, well, look at us, look at that, who
Yeah,
knew?
yeah. That just happened. Let's laugh and then let's reset.
Let's reset and maybe try
Yeah.
to avoid it in the future. Kidding, but
Well, I think that's a beautiful place to wrap up. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we will, put in the show notes below where you can stay in touch with us on our podcasts and with us individually as well on social media, our websites, things like that. So don't forget to like and follow and subscribe and all those things just to show your support, and so other people are able to see our stuff. So thanks so much.
thank you guys. Have a good one. Bye.